everybody. It's Sailboat from Sailboat.Sneakers. This is the official first video of 2021. Now I know what you're thinking. If you followed the channel at all, then you know that I've obviously published several videos before this one in the year 2021. That was old footage that I had that was on the back burner. Finally finished it up, and now I'm ready for some new projects as we get into the new year here. This is an incredibly exciting video for me. There's just a ton of new stuff going on. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about what's going to be happening. The quality should be quite improved over previous videos. We've updated all of our equipment. We're shooting in 4K. I got the GoPro going in 4K, and I'm gonna be editing on Final Cut Pro instead of iMovie. I'm also gonna be doing all of my editing on a new Mac desktop, which I couldn't be happier about. The next thing that I'm really excited for is the actual project that I'm going to be getting into. I can't find any other videos that are as specific as this one. It's a customization project that I'm going to be doing. A 3-way sole swap. 4 of the people that I've been getting inspiration from include Castlevania, Govern, From the Foot Up, and Sneakers of Sweet. They'll be linked in the description below. Truthfully, without seeing some of their projects, I definitely would not have got myself involved with this project. Last but not least, make sure that you stay tuned to the very end if you want a chance to win a lot of money off your next purchase on www.sailboat.Sneakers.com. Without further ado, let's discuss this project that I got on hand. You'll see that I got 3 pairs of sneakers. What I'm gonna be doing is a 3-way sole swap between the 3 pairs. Not a lot of hype. I think they're all gonna be wonderful pairs to experiment with for my very first sole swap ever. The first pair, and arguably the most important pair to me, these React 270s were a purchase that I made during 2020, and I was really excited because the actual model of the sneaker is one that I was super pumped on. However, when I actually put them on foot, I found out that cushioning just wasn't for me. The air bubble in back is a lot harder than the React foam up front, and it kind of makes it feel like it's pushing you onto your toes as you're walking. I've already worn them a couple of times. I was hoping that I would be able to break them in and they would become more comfortable for me. That just didn't happen, and because of that, I haven't really worn them as much as I would have liked to, even though I really love the look of the shoe. I figured it might be kind of cool to throw a 4D sole on these, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this pair of Adidas 4D, and I'm going to take off the 4D sole and put it right on those Nikes. Which brings me into my next pair. These are some ZX 4000 4D Sneaker and Stuff collaboration with Adidas, and I absolutely love the 4D cushioning system. It's most definitely not as comfortable as React or Boost right out of the box. I find these to be incredibly reactive, especially after a long day on your feet, and I feel like they are a very, very comfortable cushioning system that gives you a lot of energy in return for every step that you take. Is it quite as soft and as cushiony as Boost or React? Not so much, but I think it is a lot better for a very active day. Now obviously, if I'm going to be taking off the soles on these, I have to swap it with something else, right? Which is where this pair just comes into play. These Tresc runners were a Marshall's pickup. You can see right here, I got them for 20 bucks. So this was an absolute steal right out of the box. Boost cushioning tends to be some of the most comfortable. These are definitely no exception, and for such a cheap price at Marshall's, I figured I couldn't go wrong. Now, once the Boost comes off those Tresc runners, I'm gonna go ahead and throw the React 270 on them. The 4D soles are gonna go on the React 270s. The React 270s are gonna go on the Tresc runners, and the Boost from the Tresc runners are gonna go on these ZX 4000. I may actually experiment a little bit to find out which is the most efficient method when it comes to removing all of the soles from the actual uppers of the shoes. I'm gonna go ahead with the boiling water method first, see how it works. Let's get down to that process. So I unlaced all 3 pairs of sneakers. Now I gotta boil up some water and get it prepared to be pouring into these shoes. The one that I'm kind of least worried about is the Tresc runners. So I'm gonna use those ones first and see if I can kind of dial in my process. All right, I got this boiling hot water here. I got a funnel and these tongs, and yeah, let's fucking give it a shot. Oh fuck. Okay. Okay, well, that's not exactly how I meant to do it, but okay. Let's hope that helped, worked, maybe? I don't know. I guess we're gonna find out though. Ooh, that is some hot water right there. I don't really know if this is like exactly how I was supposed to do it, but this was one method that was recommended to me. I was told to just use like super hot water and not acetone, even though I've seen a lot of people use acetone in other videos. Yeah, I went with the hot water method because I don't want acetone eating away at the uppers of these kicks. You can feel the uppers like a ton more malleable. It doesn't really seem to be doing all that much, quite honestly, but oh, actually, oh, there we go. Okay. I see a little bit. I'm trying not to be like too harsh with these because I don't want to just ruin them at all. It seems like it worked a little bit. I can definitely feel it like wanting to peel back in certain places. You can see right there. It looks like it's peeling a little bit, kind of coming off a little bit. I don't know if I should just be forceful with it or if I should just like keep doing that. Definitely did something, that's for sure. I think I'm gonna try the acetone method here though. Give it a shot, fuck it. Why not? Let's go for it. Go for broke. The acetone method, this was something that was recommended to me, was to use a condiment bottle. I have this actual squirt bottle here instead. And basically you just wanna use a light layer of acetone in the sections where you feel like you're going to need it in the shoe. And you pour the acetone in first, and then you follow that up with boiling hot water. And quote unquote, watch the fireworks begin. It's gonna be like a science experiment. I feel like I'm gonna need to be kind of careful with this. Don't wanna be using too much acetone. I'm just gonna use this little squirt bottle to help to apply it. And I'm gonna do it right before I pour the boiling hot water on there. Got my squirt bottle all prepped, and we'll wait until the water is done boiling for round 2. All right, my boiling hot water is in there. I'm gonna go ahead and give a light coating of acetone using my squirt bottle here. Don't want to get too crazy with it, but enough so that it layers the bottom and any areas that are contacted with the boost. All right, here we go. That was not as violent of a reaction as I expected it to be. I can smell the acetone, but fuck, it's hot. Oh shit. I really thought that was gonna be like a super violent reaction, and quite honestly, just like not that much happened. Not that nothing happened, but didn't really have as much of an effect as I would have expected it to. Oh, here we go. Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay, we got a little bit of separation happening. All right, we're making some progress here. It's taking a little bit of work here, a little bit of muscle for sure. Oh, that's what's up. Look at that, you can see the separation happening right there. Super slow. So I know I'm on the right track here. I know I'm doing the right thing. There we go. It's peeling away now. Look at that right there. So that is looking much more progress than I had a couple minutes ago with just the hot water. I think I'm gonna put some more acetone underneath there and see what that'll do for me. So it's right around the edges here where there's like the strongest bond. Oh fuck, maybe the acetone wasn't such a great idea. Shit. Woo. So I can feel underneath, I'm getting my fingers under there pretty good, but it's right around the edges here where I'm having the most problem. You can see that the boost is tearing just a little bit. So I'm gonna go get an X-Acto knife to try and help me out with that process to get the boost off appropriate.
So the first shoe was definitely a learning process, and I ended up using the X-Acto knife quite a bit to help to separate the glue from the upper to the midsole. I also did spot checks with acetone throughout the process to help to kind of separate the glue a little bit further. One of the main mistakes that I made here was not using enough hot water. You'll see that during this second shoe, I used a bunch of boiling water and then just spot checked with acetone, and that pretty much crushed the entire process.
So the first sole removal has been completed. As you can tell based off of the time lapse there, the right shoe gave me a lot of trouble because I didn't really know the technique quite yet. It took me a long time, and unfortunately I kind of damaged the Boost midsole a little bit too. It definitely took a little bit more of a beating than the second shoe, which obviously went a lot more smoothly and a lot more quickly. The strategy that I found to be the most useful was pouring boiling water into the shoe several times to help to break down the bond of the glue. And then after that, I used small little squirts of acetone, which basically immediately peeled back the glue. Let's take a quick look to see what these shoes look like after I have detached the midsole from the upper. Starting with the right shoe here, you can see it almost looks like the upper has shrunk during this process. So I'm gonna be using shoe trees when I re-glue these in the long run to make sure that everything matches up as best as is possible. You can still see a lot of excessive boost on this midsole to upper attachment portion, and there's still a lot of excessive glue too. But using a Dremel tool and some acetone, I think that this will be a relatively simple process and probably will just be a little bit time consuming. Along the edge here, you can see the strongest attachment between the upper and the midsole actually pulled off some of the boost, and there was a lot of portions where I was using my X-Acto knife to try and cut the boost and the glue away from the upper. Switching over to the left shoe here, you can see there's definitely still some boost residue, especially in the front here, which is a little bit of a more difficult portion to actually detach. But in the back, overall, it's a lot cleaner. Up in the front here, no damage to the toe box whatsoever, just some excessive glue that I'm gonna have to remove. And you can tell that the boost on this shoe actually looks a lot better too, with a lot less chunks taken out of it. I was originally pretty worried that the uppers had actually shrunk during this process. When you detach them, it's gonna look a little bit like they don't match up correctly. I was told that this was pretty normal by some of the sole swap artists that I've been in touch with, but it's really important to recognize that these are specific to one another. So it's always gonna be a little bit of a mismatch when you're trying to match a different upper with a different midsole. Next up, my ZX 4000 4Ds. From my understanding, detaching the 4D midsoles is a bit easier, but it's something that only time will tell. I'm gonna use the same process as I used on the second Tresc runner shoe, and hopefully that will work out well for me. Let's get into it and find out.
I started off my process with the ZX 4000s the same way that I did with the Tresc runners, assuming that it would work out just as well. Unfortunately, because of the mesh footbed of the ZX 4000s, the hot water did not sit there and it just drained through the shoe immediately. So instead, I ended up pouring acetone along the edges of the shoe where the best bond from the midsole to the upper was, letting it sit for a moment, and then spot hitting everywhere with hot boiling water. That way it made the glue dissipate almost immediately and made my separation basically flawless.
At this point in time, I have removed the 4D midsoles from the ZX 4000s. The process that I use in comparison to the Tresc Runner Boosts was a little bit different. The actual bottom of the upper is completely ventilated, meaning that as soon as I poured hot water into it, it just seeped out the bottom of the shoe. Now this meant that I couldn't have the hot water sitting in the shoe quite as long, which meant that it didn't do as good of a job in removing the bond. One way that helped me to actually remove the uppers from the midsole was to saturate the mesh portions of the upper utilizing some acetone, and then poured boiling hot water into it. It made that reaction happen a lot more quickly to separate the glue between the midsole and the upper. One of the things that I found was that working on the first shoe was much more of an experimentation and learning process. The second shoe was a lot easier, went a lot quicker, and a lot smoother. Start off with the right shoe, which is what I did first. Right now I have a shoe tree with some towels in there to help to absorb all of the excessive water. One of the things that ended up happening during this process was I actually got some acetone on the suede right here, so a lot of the suede dye kind of got pulled out and onto my hand, unfortunately. You'll see on the upper portion here, this kind of plasticky part, which was stuck to the midsole, was terribly difficult to detach. Right along this portion here, you'll see there's a little bit of a tear. Still some excessive glue right through here that I'm gonna have to clean up. That should be pretty easy though. I'll be able to take care of that, no problem. And the actual bottom of the uppers here look pretty good. Because of the acetone on the suede here, I ended up losing the paint that said Los Angeles right there. That was a golden paint, and now you can see that it just kind of pressed into the suede. More of an issue with this kind of plasticky cage along the side here. I had a lot of trouble preserving that, and you can see that a big chunk of it actually got pulled off. Overall, the upper is still in very good condition. Glad that there's no holes or no issues with the stitching. Coming to to the midsole here, you'll see that there were 2 points or 3 points where I actually had a crack in the 4D. Now it doesn't go too deep down into the actual midsole of the shoe, but it is something that I'm just gonna have to be aware of. Over here, a couple of small cracks, nothing nearly as severe as on the medial portion. You can see that there is some excessive material that I'm gonna need to clean off of this, especially right over here where that plastic cage kind of got pulled off. But overall, it's actually not too bad. Let's come over and check out the left shoe. With the uppers here, you can tell a little bit of a difference. I actually just ended up cutting this plastic portion of the upper right there. I might just pull off this plastic in the long run once everything is all glued together. Realistically, no flaws except for some excessive glue, which I'll be able to remove later on. Over on this suede right here, I actually didn't get quite as much acetone on there, so it's a little bit better condition. It didn't lose quite as much color. Tearing of that plasticky material on the lateral aspect of the shoe. Again, I lost all of the paint on that imprinted Los Angeles 2019. Coming over to the midsole, you can much more clearly see that plastic portion right there, which got pulled off of the upper, and it's actually kind of difficult to peel off of there, so that's gonna be kind of annoying. And the only place where I had any sort of issues with the 4D midsole on this side, I was a little bit too forceful with my pulling when I was separating the upper from the midsole, but you can hardly even tell, and I think that that, as far as like structurally, is not quite as compromised, which is wonderful news. Well, the process of detaching the 4D midsole, a little bit more ease because I didn't have to worry about ruining the actual midsole quite as much. You can see that I utilized the acetone first, and then I utilized some boiling water, and then I did little spot checks with acetone as I went through. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the end result here. The last pair that I'm gonna have to work on the detachment process with are these 270 Reacts. I'm really uncertain how this is gonna go because it's a completely different style of shoe. I have to worry about popping the air unit, I have to worry about ruining the React, and I have to worry about ruining this kind of faux suede on the sides of the upper here.
For the Air Max 270 Reacts, it was actually a pretty easy separation process, and I just used a combination of the first 2 processes that I had used for the Tresc runners and the ZX4000. Basically, I just did a steady and even application of acetone along with the boiling hot water, and it just helped to basically separate the glue from the midsole to the uppers. Both of these separations went by pretty flawlessly. I was just extra careful of the heat and the acetone around the air units.
So I finally got the last pair finished here. I thought it was gonna be one of the hardest pairs to detach, but it actually turned out to be the easiest pair. Pretty pumped on the results on these ones. Starting with the right shoe here, pretty clean detach. You can see that there is still a lot of excessive glue that I'm gonna need to clean up here. Little bit of the upper pulled away, but not too much. Biggest issues with this midsole, right in the back here, you can see a little bit of that midsole kind of peeling up. And right along the lateral border here, this was the worst of it. Got a little bit of a peel right there, but that's something that I can glue back down. Shouldn't give me too much of an issue. Gonna have to clean this all up. Right here, the outsole still attached to the midsole pretty damn well. On the upper here, also a couple of little issues, nothing too major. You can see a little bit of peeling of this blue portion from the teal portion, and that actually happened over on the medial aspect as well too. Again, nothing that a little bit of glue can't fix. Coming to the left shoe here, you can still see a pretty substantial amount of glue. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of detachment from the outsole to the midsole. Nothing too crazy, but enough that I'm probably gonna have to touch it up with a little bit of glue. All of this portion of the midsole towards the heel and the midfoot actually looks really good. This upper actually detached a lot more clean. Not really too many flaws here. Just a bunch of excessive glue that I'm gonna need to clean up. And all of this material actually stayed together pretty well during the detaching process. So that looks pretty darn good. Now I got a bunch of prep work to do. I gotta get the uppers and the midsoles completely clear of any excessive glue that might be on them. Gonna be using my rotary tool, aka Dremel, even though this isn't a Dremel brand tool, and a little bit of acetone to touch these suckers up before I can go ahead and get them re-glued. This is a long but tedious process as far as the cleaning is concerned. Gonna do a little bit of a time lapse, and hopefully this won't be too boring, but this is a very important step, because if I want to get a clean bond when I go to glue, it's absolutely imperative that I get all of the junk off of there to create the cleanest surfaces possible to try to encourage the best bond that I can.
Where do I even begin with the preparation process? This is one of the most dreaded and least look forward to parts of any sort of customization or restoration project, but it's arguably the most important, so it definitely deserves a bit of time and attention. What you'll notice is that I ended up using my rotary tool, aka a Dremel, a fuck ton during this process. I absolutely love it. However, I do think that having one that is wall operated instead of battery operated would have benefited me substantially, because I ran out of battery way too many times during this process. It also took me probably a dozen different Dremel bits before I found the one that really suited me best. But once I did, it definitely sped up the process substantially. One of the things that I found was really beneficial for me was working on one specific pair of sneakers at a time, so I could really perfect my technique and just utilize it as much as possible. You'll see I was a lot more scattered in the beginning, but a lot more focused towards the end. I also found that if I applied small bits of acetone utilizing a cotton ball with acetone on it, and then applied heat, it kind of helped to separate the glue, which allowed me to use my Dremel a little bit more accurately to remove all of the junk that was still on the shoe.
So the preparation process is nearly finished, and it was a fuck ton of work. There was a lot of bumps in the road that I hit throughout the course of the preparation and glue removal. I'm still not totally convinced that I'm at an appropriate place to begin the reglue, but I think that I've done just about as much as I possibly can with the pairs that I have. The first pair that I'm going to be regluing, the Tresc Runner uppers with the React 270 midsole outsole combination. Let's take a quick look at the work that I've done before I get into the regluing portion. Taking a quick look at the top of the midsoles here, this may actually be the cleanest as far as glue removal is concerned. This pair was definitely the easiest. I developed a couple of techniques along the way that seemed to really help. I kind of used a quick heat followed by an acetone wipe, and basically what would happen is the glue would kind of bubble up, easier to remove in the spots where I had hit it with the acetone prior to heating. There are a bunch of divots in here from the Dremel work that I was doing. Unfortunately, I had a couple of slips and a couple of points where the Dremel just kind of bit into the React material because it's pretty easy to grab a hold of, and that kind of caused some divoting. You can see up with this little cut right here that it actually burnt a little bit as I was heating it, so definitely got to be careful as far as how much heat is being applied to these midsoles. But overall, I think these are actually in one of the better positions as far as getting ready for the reglue. Coming over to the left midsole, again, similar issues, but overall it's actually looking really good, and I think that this is going to be a good surface to reglue. Moving over to the uppers, this is actually where I had a lot of issues because there is a lot of stitch work here that actually keeps these uppers together. It was kind of difficult to try and get all of the glue without cutting out some of the stitch work. Still this kind of slight sheen from the glue on this entire bottom portion there, and I just don't really know what to do about that because I've used acetone over and over and over, and it just wouldn't really remove everything that you can see. I do have this nice clean area as far as the raw leather is concerned. Coming over to the left shoe here, exactly the same issues as the right shoe. It's a lot better than where I started off. I've been able to knock off all the excessive boost that was on there. I don't think that I have much of a choice but to just give it a shot and try to reglue to the best of my ability with where I'm at right now. This is going to be the first pair that I'm going to reglue. I think it's going to be really challenging because the upper and the midsole do not match up that well. That's the next step in the process.
So prep work doesn't end with the cleaning. You need to make sure that you mark appropriate lines as far as where the midsole is going to match up with your upper once you have the shoes re-glued together. Utilizing a pencil, I did this on the uppers, and then I went through and cleaned off any sort of excessive junk that I needed to. I applied my Barge Super Stick cement as I normally would for any sort of restoration process, and I let it cure for about 2 hours before I went to apply heat to reactivate the glue. When I did this process at the advice of Castlevania, I actually went from a toe to heel gluing fashion. I started with the toe and I matched it up appropriately, and then I went to the heel and I matched it up appropriately. The mid will fall into place if you do that, but if not, then you're gonna have a shoe that is off kilter.
Right now, it's about time that I finish up the final prep work on this pair so I can get the re-glue going. So I'm gonna do exactly that. So taking a quick look at the right upper here, there's still some excess glue right where the outsole attached at the toe cap. Coming over to the medial side of the shoe, just a little bit of excess glue right through here. But as we get to the midfoot portion, I'm gonna try to remove just the bottom portion right here to try and give it a clean cut look across. Coming to the back of the shoe, still a little bit of excess glue that I think I can remove utilizing some acetone and some cotton balls. So I'll do a quick little scrub down on that and just a little bit of excess glue over on the lateral side as well. This is a portion that I'm gonna have to be especially delicate with because acetone is especially rough on suede and can really remove some of the suede dye as well. On the bottom portion of the midsole here, you can see that there's a whole bunch of glue that's like kind of in between these crevices on the mesh. I've tried to remove that multiple times and it's something that I can't really get into with my Dremel, and it doesn't really seem to be wanting to come off with acetone. This portion right here, I don't think is gonna be quite as important when it comes to the re-glue, so I don't think I'm gonna have to worry about it too much, but I still wanna get it as clean as possible. The Boost midsoles actually look pretty good. There's a couple little chunks that were taken out during the actual removal process, but realistically, the only cleaning I'm gonna have to do is on the toe cap here.
You'll notice that the prep work never stops. You gotta try to make sure that everything is as clean as possible. I kept utilizing heat and acetone to try to get off all the excess glue before I applied a new layer of barge super stick cement. Now this one was a little bit harder to line up because of the Boost. However, I did a pretty good job. Again, utilizing the toe and then heel method that Castlevania taught me, I ended up getting a really good alignment on both shoes, although one was a little bit tilted. You'll notice that on the lateral aspect of both shoes that there's a little portion that's still kind of sticking up on the upper in comparison to the midsole. So I just applied a little bit more glue, waited another 2 hours, and then applied some heat to reactivate the glue and get the upper sticking to the midsole as best as possible.
So I'm on to the final part of this project as far as the re-glues are concerned. I got the 4D sole from the ZX 4000s and the uppers from the Air Max 270 Reacts. I am going to be putting these uppers on the 4D midsoles. This is my favorite upper out of all three that I've utilized so far, and like I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of the 4D midsole.
I knew that for this pair, alignment was going to be of the essence because of the unforgiving nature of the 4D midsole. So I made sure to mark with pencil on the uppers the most appropriate spots where the midsole would be making contact for the best glue application as possible. After several very thin layers of glue, I let the sneaker sit for another 2 hours, just like my other re-gluing process, before I went and hit it with the heat gun to reactivate the glue. Again, I used the Castlevania toe to heel method. Thank you again for teaching me that. I really do appreciate it. And I attached the toe and then the heel as best as I could before I even touched the middle portion of the shoe. It's a lot more clear here, and I think that you can really appreciate how much pressure I actually applied during the process of the re-glue of this shoe. I did a little bit better on the second one than the first one, just learning from the mistakes of the first one, but overall they came out really nicely, and it was time to get everything laced up so then that way we could see a final comparison between all three pairs.
Here we are. Final product, at least close enough to it that I'm gonna talk about it and review it a little bit here. I want to start off by saying that this project was insanely challenging. This was easily the hardest sneaker restoration or customization job that I've ever done before. Working with some very harsh chemicals, being around acetone very regularly, being around the barge super stick cement, both of them are crazy harsh chemicals that you have to be really careful with. It was a very physical process, quite honestly. I didn't realize how much pressure I was gonna have to apply, how much tearing apart I was gonna have to do. Also, it was a very mentally challenging task. There were a lot of ups and downs with this process. Sometimes I felt like I was doing amazing. Sometimes I felt like I was doing absolutely awful. There were multiple times during this project where I damn near gave up. I was just so frustrated with the progress, or I guess lack thereof. And then there were a bunch of times where I got insanely excited because I was like, man, this is actually working. For anybody that does want to undertake this task, I would say go for it. It's insanely rewarding, but just recognize that it's really, really challenging and it takes a long time. I would estimate that overall I probably put about 20 hours worth of work into this process. But let's get down to the final product. Starting off, I got the Adidas Tresc Runner uppers with the Nike Air Max 270 React sole. I actually really like the look of these shoes a lot more than I expected to, but there's a couple of things that went wrong during the process that I really need to address. Let's talk about it and take a closer look. Starting off right here on the right shoe, you can see that the fit is actually pretty damn good. There's still a couple of things that I need to clean up using a little bit of acetone, a little bit of excessive glue that's on the midsoles there. But overall, that bond is actually pretty strong. You can see I'm pressure testing it, and you know, there's a couple of spots where it might not be quite as strong as it could be, but overall it's holding together pretty good. You can see I'm pressure testing with some pretty significant pressure, and they're holding together. Now up along the front here, obviously a little bit of a gap right there. That's a spot where I just didn't get the stick down as nice as it could have been. And one of the things that I didn't recognize is that this toe cap here was not going to mesh up absolutely perfectly. So you can see some of this area where I dremeled is definitely not covered by the toe cap, but I matched it up basically as best as I possibly could. I'm really happy with the way that this right shoe turned out. I decided to swap out for some laces that were a little bit more kind of continuous with the color of the midsole. It's not an exact match, but I think it looks pretty good, and I actually really like that kind of contrast. On the left shoe, you can see there's definitely some excessive glue up at the front here, and I didn't get the bond quite as accurately. You can see some of the spots where I dremeled, so that's a little bit more of that raw leather underneath there. That glue looks a little bit worse. Again, that toe cap didn't match up quite as well as it potentially could have, but it's a really good bond still. It's really strong. It's holding together pretty well, except for right over on this edge where I probably could have utilized a bit of extra glue. Coming through the back here, everything is sticking pretty well. Again, another spot where maybe a little bit more glue would have been appropriate. It's still holding together pretty well for the most part. Now, one of the biggest issues that I had with this side, you might be able to tell right there, is I actually popped the air unit. You can hear that air kind of leaking out. This happened when I was gluing the midsole to the uppers and I was heating it. I held the heat gun there for a little bit too long, and you could just hear that pop happen. And a little bit of an issue with the bond up here, I'm just recognizing as I pressure test it. Again, it's close enough to the top that I could just stick some Barge Super Stick in there and potentially get it glued back together nicely. A couple of spots where the gluing didn't go quite as well as I was hoping, but oh well. Realistically, this right here is my practice pair, so I'm not really like too bummed. It was a really good learning opportunity. I really like the look of the shoe. I think it looks really cool. I guess we'll find out. I'm gonna see how it feels on foot. I'm gonna try it out a little bit. If it's nice, I'll continue to wear it. If not, then you know, at least I got good practice out of it. Next pair up here, the ZX 4000 upper with that Tresc Runner midsole outsole combination. These actually turned out a lot better than I expected. The upper from the ZX 4000 definitely does not fit on this midsole quite as well as the other combinations did, so I kind of had to stretch the upper to a certain extent to make it fit. In the end, it looked pretty good. So the right shoe here, you can see the bond, super strong. Really nice. A little bit of glue right there, but you know, it's just kind of peeling up. It's not affecting the actual re-glue here at all. You can see it's nice and strong all the way through the back. Coming through the heel, again, it stays nice and strong even with all this pressure testing. I tried my best to straighten out the edge a little bit here. Coming over the front, again, pressure testing looks pretty good. A little bit of a divot in the boost from when I was separating the uppers from the midsole, but on the toe cap right here, it actually is holding on pretty nicely. And the overall look is pretty solid. If we compare the lateral sides of the two shoes, there's a little bit more of this suede portion on the left shoe than the right shoe because of the angle and the tilt that I actually glued the uppers on there. You can see right back here with how much of that suede is kind of sticking up, how drastic it actually is. Now, it's not going to be so noticeable when I'm actually wearing the shoes, but it's something that I notice, and obviously being kind of a perfectionist, it does bother me a little bit, but not enough that I'm pissed off about it because I still think that they look really cool. On the left shoe here, again, I got a nice strong bond. This suede got damaged during the actual removal of the uppers from the midsole. You can see that discoloration there. I got a little bit too much acetone on there. I will be using a suede brush to try and even that out as best as possible, but I think that that's going to be some kind of permanent damage. Coming through the more middle portion of the shoe, everything looks pretty good. On the heel here, again, a little bit of excessive glue, but other than that, like, it's sticking really, really well. Coming over to the medial aspect, again, a great bond all the way through. Pressure testing, no issues whatsoever. And at the toe here, just a little bit of a gap. That's a little bit of an issue that I had when I was gluing this on there. I'm really happy with how this turned out, quite honestly. I think that this pair turned out surprisingly cool. I wasn't expecting too much from it. Thought that this was gonna be just kind of a junker, but now that I have them and I'm looking at them, I actually really, really like them. I feel like this is gonna be a super comfortable shoe. I think that this upper goes really, really well on the Boost midsole, and I guess I'm gonna have to test it out for comfort, see how it feels. Pretty solid second attempt at a sole swap right there. And that brings me to the last pair, which was the entire inspiration behind this sole swap hybrid. This is my Air Max 270 React upper with the 4D midsole. I'm in love with these things. I really am fucking pumped at how these came out. They're by no means perfect, but they definitely came out really, really well, and I'm very, very happy with the result. On the right shoe here, one of my biggest complaints is at the front. The midsole and the toe box just didn't match up 100%. You can see a little bit of a gap right there. Realistically, it's so minimal, you're not gonna be able to notice it on foot. Coming over to the medial aspect of the shoe, one little tiny issue is with the upper right here. You can see that I actually burnt a little bit through it. There's some tiny pinholes because I was holding the heat gun on this material for too long. But this bond right here between the midsole and the upper is so solid. There's very minimal gapping. There is a little bit of kind of wear on the uppers from where I had to Dremel away some of the glue. Overall, this is looking amazing. The colors match up insanely nicely, and this is exactly what I was hoping for. On the sole of this upper right here, I burnt a hole through with my heat gun. Again, still trying to dial in my heat gun use. Coming over to the left shoe here, you can see on the medial aspect that just based off of the way that I re-glued this and the angle and tilt, there is some kind of wrinkling within the upper right there. And that was something that's kind of unavoidable because of the fact that the upper and the midsole don't match quite exactly. But up here, there's no gap in between the midsole and the upper. So that's something that I'm really proud of. Same thing over on the lateral side of the toe box here. And as I come through, do a pressure test, little bit of separation right there. Nothing too crazy, you know, it looks pretty good still. It's not fully separating by any means. You can always just stick a little bit more glue in there to help to keep it sticking together. Coming to the back here, again, maybe just a tiny little bit of separation, but nothing that's going to damage the actual structure of the shoe. And it's just looking really good overall. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Still a strong bond with that glue. I'm pulling up right here on the upper and pulling down on the midsole, and that's not moving anywhere. This is like gonna be one of my favorite pairs. I love the look, I really do. And I'm so happy I was able to put one together for myself. A couple of things that I learned during this process. Number one, patience is of the utmost importance. You gotta be patient during this process. There are going to be so many times where you feel like giving up, you feel like you're failing completely, especially on your first time. And all I gotta say is that the effort that you're gonna put in is absolutely worth it. Second lesson that I learned during this process is be careful when you're dealing with these harsh chemicals. You'll notice throughout the entirety of this event, I did not use like a respirator or a mask or anything, and that honestly is a mistake. The glue is insanely strong and it can really cause you to get lightheaded very quickly. Acetone is also a very strong product and you have to be very careful. So just make sure that you're taking the proper precautions when you're doing this, and I would highly recommend some sort of respirator. Third lesson that I learned, the Dremel bit that you use makes a world of difference. Whatever tool that you are using, make sure that you find a bit that works out best for you. Once you do, it accelerates the process substantially. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that I learned, but quite honestly, I think that those are probably the top 3 takes that I have from this process. It was a really awesome learning experience. It was a lot of fun, and I can guarantee you that I'll be doing this again with some different pairs. Doing the 3 pairs this time gave me a solid ground to practice with. I am really excited with the results, so Before I call it quits for this video, I just want to say massive shout out to Govern, massive shout out to From the Foot Up, massive shout out to Castlevania, and massive shout out to Sneakers is Sweet. I've been following their work on Instagram for several months now, and that's kind of what gave me the idea to do this. Throughout the entire process, I was asking them questions and they were giving me a ton of free knowledge. I don't think that I would have been able to do this without the help from you guys, so thank you. Seriously, I really do appreciate it. That's gonna do it for today. Stay tuned for the end of the credits. There is going to be a $100 off code for my website, www.Sailboat.Sneakers.com, that is brought to you by my homie Shane. Shane, Cortez Life 72 on Twitter, is one of the Soul Supremacy Beater Box homies. He reached out to me. He's been a long-time supporter, and he told me that he wanted to do something for the channel. He told me that he was going to give me $100, and he wanted me to put it towards some sort of giveaway where I could help somebody score a great deal off of the website. This is your opportunity right here. All you gotta do is stick around to the end of the credits. Appreciate you guys stopping through for this one. I know it's a little bit of a longer one than usual. I'm Sailboat. This was my first Soul Swap hybrid. I appreciate you stopping by. I'm out of here. Much love to Shane. Really appreciate you, homie. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this giveaway. The question that I want you to answer for me is, on my YouTube channel, I have done several different restorations, but there is one complete restoration that I've done in a sequential fashion with multiple different parts. I want you to tell me, what is the silhouette of the shoe? What is the official colorway of the shoe as noted on GOAT app? And what year did the shoe release? If you can answer those three parts of the question correctly, you might have your chance at $100 off on www.Sailboat.Sneakers.com. Hit me up on Instagram at Sailboats.Sneakers with the correct answer for your chance to win. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.